Good morning, everyone, and welcome to our quarterly banking webinar. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Brad Stumpe, and I'm a partner at Anders. My specialty is financial institution compliance, and by financial institutions, I primarily mean banks and credit unions, some broker-dealers, and I also lead our loan review team. I know some of you joined us a little early, so you've probably spent more than enough time studying our photos, so let's keep moving. We try to gear these sessions towards hot topics in the industry. And recently, those have revolved around a lot of compliance issues, such as equal credit opportunity. Anybody hear of 1071, community reinvestment, funds availability, flood insurance, BSA, HMDA? We go on and on. We've had a good response to those. And I think we're pretty well known for our specialization in traditional bank compliance, loan review, audit, and tax services. What we're maybe not so well known for are IT services for financial institutions. These have long revolved around general control testing, but more recently have expanded into areas such as assisting with fractional CIO services. As we're approaching the retirement of the FFIEC's Cybersecurity Assessment Tool, or CAT for short, we thought now would be a good time to pivot from our traditional compliance webinars and maybe spend a little bit more time on IT. But for those of you who do know me, you know that I'm probably not the guy you want to get down in the weeds with when it comes to discussing IT. So I brought a couple of friends with me today who do have that expertise, and they can speak IT at a much higher level than I can. But before I introduce my friends, though, shameless plug time, I'd like to draw your attention to our new logo and tagline at the bottom of this slide. The power to dream big. So for those of you who have been trudging along under the CAT and thought that there must be a better way, now may be the time for you to dream big about what that better way may be. Here are those two friends, Abe and Sarah. Sarah Knox-Hansen is a principal here at Anders. Sarah specializes in SOC 1, SOC 2, and internal audit services, mostly in the banking, healthcare, and technology industries. Abe Babler is also a principal with us, and Abe specializes in IT audits, governance, risk, and compliance, and has been working with financial institutions for about 25 years. So a long time, but not quite as long as me. Okay, so if you've been with us before, you know that we throw in a couple of polls along the way to help liven things up. And to make it worth your while for participating, we'll be selecting a winner from those who do participate in each poll to win a Starbucks gift card. So you'll have 3 opportunities to win. To kick things off, we have just a quick icebreaker question. Please let us know how long you've been an IT professional at a bank or a credit union. So just click your option, hit submit, and then I think you can see the responses. So it looks like the 2 top ones are the long timers, 25 years or more. We remember back all the way to when GLIBA was passed, and then those who have no experience as an IT professional at a financial institution. So wonderful. All right, it looks like probably everybody who's going to respond has. Very good. Thank you for participating in that. So we're about to get into the meat of this now. I think the next slide is a basic agenda that we'll follow today. There it is. Wonderful. So Sarah will start things off by covering an overview of the CAT and begin discussing the frameworks. Abe will then jump in with some details, and we'll work in a second poll somewhere along the way. Then I'll jump in to wrap things up and possibly moderate some Q&A if we have time. And speaking of Q&A, a little bit of housekeeping I forgot to touch on earlier. If you have questions during the session, please place them in the Q&A feature and not in the chat. So if you look at the top toolbar, you'll see Q&A just to the right of the chat. So put your answers there in the Q&A. And also, if time allows, we'll try to discuss some of them at the end of the session. So Sarah, with that, I think I've covered pretty much all I know about IT. So do you mind jumping in and taking it from here?
Thank you, Brad. Yes. Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us today. Briefly, just going to acknowledge that I did lose air conditioning last night, so I am a little tired today. So if I stumble over all of these acronyms, please forgive me and stick with me. So first, just for our listeners that may be new to the topic, it looks like we have some newer professionals in the audience today. I just thought we could review kind of the history of where the CAT came from to give you a baseline for the rest of the discussion. So as you're likely aware, the Gramm-Leach-Bliley Act of 1999, which increased the need for information sharing, also increased the need for security and privacy, and required banks to devise and implement information security programs. So obviously, computing and security was in existence prior to this, but this is really kind of what kickstarted the development of the frameworks that we'll discuss today, as well as many others. In 2008, the SANS Top 20 was released, which is now referred to as CIS. And NIST CSF 1.1 then was released in 2014, kind of on the heels of legislation passed by President Barack Obama. CRI in 2018 was updated a number of times and then released again most recently actually just in April of this year, which isn't reflected on this slide. And then CISA's CPG goals was released in 2022 and 2023, and we will review those today as well. But the CAT, in June of 2015, the FFIEC Cybersecurity Assessment Tool, commonly known as the CAT, was developed to help financial institutions assess their cybersecurity risks and preparedness. It's important to understand that the CAT is and was a voluntary assessment tool. And while the fundamental security controls addressed through the maturity levels of the CAT are sound, several new and updated government and industry resources are available that financial institutions can leverage to better manage their cybersecurity risks. The FFIEC will sunset the CAT on August 31st of this year. So then what happens? Does the need for an assessment disappear? Well, no, but what the FFIEC determined is that due to the rapidly evolving technological landscape, their tool, the CAT, was just not keeping up. So we'll spend time here today reviewing other options, the other frameworks and tools available, and discuss a few benefits and challenges of each. So first, let's take a look at the FFIEC CAT sunset statement on the next few slides. Before we dive into the different frameworks, I just wanted to review what the statement covered for context, some of which I've already spoken to. As you can see, though, in mid-paragraph 3, the FFIEC states that the CAT has not kept up with the other resources, and they specifically mention 2 government resources, to be specific, NIST CSF and the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, CISA's Cybersecurity Performance Goals. They state that supervised financial institutions can reference these instead, and they also provide other resources. So let's examine further down the page. Within this portion of the statement, they also state that financial institutions may consider the use of other industry-developed resources, including the Cyber Risk Institute's Cyber Profile, which we'll review later, and the Center for Internet Security Critical Security Controls. So these are tools that can be used in conjunction with other resources to assist management with the continuously evolving cyber risk landscape. If you haven't visited this statement, we do encourage you to go view this on their website. We have the link here for you. The other blue items here and the additional resources are part of this screenshot. So, but once you go to this website, you can click through them with direct access. Okay, so as you can see from this slide, this is an overview of kind of what the CAT looks like when you visit their website and you're reviewing implementation of the tool. An important distinction between the CAT and the other frameworks we'll discuss today is that the CAT isn't really a traditional framework by definition. It's an assessment mechanism. So the CAT provides a very detailed guidance on inherent risk and maturity assessments that organizations will use kind of to evaluate at the domain level. They specify 5 domains, including cyber risk management and oversight, threat intelligence and collaboration, cybersecurity controls, etc. So we won't dive further into those details today, but I just wanted to provide the concepts ahead of time for continued discussion on the other frameworks and tools. One interesting thing to note here, though, is that the CAT resource actually references a mapping to NIST, and we'll see this as a common theme throughout the discussion today. So let's take a look at these options. What are all of these? Hopefully you've heard, I'm sure many of you have heard of all of them, but that's what we're here to discuss today. So we'll discuss, the history. Where do they come from? What do they look like in practice? And what factors are important to consider when you're evaluating for implementation? And really what's right for your organization. It's not a one-size-fits-all. We list the other frameworks topic here to mention that those exist, such as ISO 27001, 800-171, and 853, but these are just not as organizationally applicable, and therefore we won't be reviewing them in detail today. Right, so I think with that, I'm going to pass it to Abe for his discussion of NIST to kick us off.
Thank you, Sarah. I appreciate that. The National Institute of Standards and Technology Cybersecurity Framework, or NIST CSF, is a security framework introduced in 2014 as an executive order during the Obama administration, which Sarah had touched on earlier. Now, as you'll recall, the CAT was released in 2015. The CSF was developed in response to the presidential executive order on improving critical infrastructure security, which was issued in February 2013. So what is the CSF? The NIST Cybersecurity Framework is a set of voluntary guidelines designed to help organizations assess and improve their ability to prevent, detect, and respond to cybersecurity risks. The benefits of using this framework include flexibility. It can be tailored to the specific needs of an organization, help manage and reduce cybersecurity risks effectively. The latest version, CSF 2.0, was issued in 2024 and offers guidance to various sectors, including industry and government, to enhance their cybersecurity posture. Of note with the CSF is that it is designed to be a living document that evolves over time, integrating lessons learned and adapting to new technologies and threat landscapes. The framework also incorporates recommendations for cybersecurity incident response, ensuring comprehensive risk management. As the CAT is being retired, the freely available NIST Cybersecurity Framework is the most adopted option when considering alternatives, with polls showing more than 50% of the banks choosing this path. It is extremely flexible, used across industries, as noted in the guidance. It is not prescriptive, which allows for that flexibility and still provides areas of constant improvement. It is one of the least impactful frameworks in adoption efforts needed for implementation, which shows why it is the frontrunner in adopted frameworks, among other factors that we will discuss in the next few slides. As you can see, the CSF framework is built upon the core components of govern, identify, protect, detect, respond, and recover. The framework can be used across industries, including financial services, and even across organizations as a comprehensive model to evaluate all risks, not just information security. From the original CSF, CSF 2.0 was added to the govern function to provide alignment with the other functions and put them into perspective and prioritize them appropriately. Govern is the structure for identify, protect, detect, respond, and recover. Illustrated here, you can see the structure of the functions displayed on the previous slide. Under those functions are specifically defined categories. The categories then have subcategories that lend themselves to specific outcomes. Those outcomes are the control mechanisms utilized by each individual institution. So you have three layers here. The functions, which are a grouping of categories relevant to the name of the functions. The categories, which are subsets of the function that divides up the function into manageable areas. And the subcategories that allow for specific mechanisms that each bank performs to meet categories' needs. This overall structure provides intuitive guidance for a number of pragmatic controls to formulate a cybersecurity framework. There are still broad aspects that will need to be fleshed out in the supporting guidance for the categories, but there is other supporting tools to assist you with that, and we'll touch on them shortly. The structure of the guidance is worth examining and provides some depth to the attractiveness of this particular framework, among other elements that we will still need to present. As illustrated here, we can see three areas defined for adaptation to the cybersecurity framework. The CSF core, as defined here, is presented as a structure that I just went over, whereby the functions, categories, and subcategories construct what is referred to in NIST CSF as the CSF outcomes. In other words, NIST CSF is taking functions, categories, and subcategories to define what the risk outcomes should be, and this allows each institution to better adapt to and understand what the definition of those risk controls should look like. Some of this may seem a little ambiguous if you absorb all the subcategories or read even some of the ones that we displayed here, and then find yourself scratching your head as to what exactly NIST is asking for. But there is more guidance that will assist with this that we will discuss. The culmination of the banks and credit unions defining the controls specifically lined up with or mapped to the subcategories known as the mechanisms is referred to as the organizational profiles. Another way to understand the definition of the organizational profiles is to understand that the specific controls that banks and credit unions put in place or are looking to achieve as a whole is the organizational profile. Looking at that logically from the other direction, if you take all the subcategories an institution has chosen to adopt or is considering adopting sometime in the future, along with the status of those subcategories, you have the organizational profile. And the last notable item from the structure guidance is the tiers, which are essentially CSF's version of measuring the maturity of the risk control in place. As we look at the status of the controls in place that make up the profile of an organization, NIST CSF has provided a measuring process referred to as tiers. The details are displayed here for your consideration. When the profile is established, the tiers, when combined with the consideration of adding or ignoring controls, provides for a quantitative measuring process. And when added to each control across the profile, they provide a clearer overview of the status of the profile itself. It is understanding this feature, along with other constructs of CSF, that provides for the flexibility touted by the adopters of CSF and the understanding that CSF is not the exclusive source of risk control decisions for an organization. Excuse me. From a practical standpoint, CSF has provided a number of tools that support adopters, including implementation guidance. The guidance is not prescriptive, just as the entire framework is not prescriptive, but the examples provided allow for a clear interpretation of the subcategories and offers examples that can be utilized or paralleled to reach the Tier 4 controls for the organization's relevant risks. Innovations like this are why CSF 2.0 has the least cost for implementation purposes of the frameworks that we're discussing today. A little bit of a side-by-side here, comparison with the CAT and the CSF 2.0. There are similarities to the CAT that are unmistakable and therefore fairly attractive as the continuation of institutional risk management practices. We have already touched on the risk measurement process that you can see, but we can also see the regulation overlap between the CAT and CSF, and we've discussed the flexibility and measurement aspects. And of course, it is a recently established and living framework as noted on the slide. With that, I believe we have our second polling question. Brad, would you like to take that?
Yes, we do, and yes, I would. So thanks, Abe. That was a good overview of NIST. Before Sarah jumps in to the CPG and CRI frameworks, let's do another poll. With this, before we dive in, we're just trying to get a feel for where you are currently on the framework landscape. So if you can take a moment and respond to the poll, that'll be helpful as we move through today's discussion. And yes, we will be selecting another winner for a Starbucks gift card from those who participate in the poll. So here we're simply asking if you're using the CAT or one of the other frameworks. And let's see what the results are showing us. So as we expected, it looks like most of you are using the CAT, a little bit CIS 2.0 or NIST 2.0, and then some others as well. So just for fun, if you're on other and you want to drop that in the chat as to which other one you're using, that'd be great. And also just to remind you, if you have any questions as we go, to feel free to go ahead and put those in the Q&A, and we'll try to get to those as we move through this. So I believe everybody who's going to respond has probably done so. Sarah, are you ready to jump back in?
Absolutely. Thanks, Brad. We can move to the next slide. There we go. So in keeping with our theme, first, is everybody awake? I know this is a lot of technical jargon and not probably the most exciting topic. So thanks again for joining us. But we'll dive in. If you do have any questions, please, again, feel free to submit, especially, just to kind of break up the topics. If you are using, I saw a few CRIs, for example, and we get to those slides, feel free to submit questions. So in keeping with our theme, though, let's again dive into the historical context. Federal legislation established CISA to protect federal civilian agency networks and enhance security of critical infrastructures. CISA is the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, which is a component of the United States Department of Homeland Security, and it's responsible for cybersecurity and infrastructure protection across all levels of government. CISA's cross-sector cybersecurity performance goals, the CPGs, are a subset of cybersecurity practices aimed at reducing risks to critical infrastructure operations. And notice how many times I've said infrastructure. That is the target, and that was the lens from which this was developed, was kind of our national infrastructure. So largely, the American people as a whole. CPGs are voluntary practices aimed to deliver high impact security actions that outline the highest priority baseline that measure businesses and critical infrastructure owners of all sizes can take to protect themselves against cyber threats. So the focus here is on those high impact security outcomes and the high impact security actions that can be taken to address them. They were developed based on CISA's operational data, research on the current threat landscape, and in collaboration with government, industry groups, and private sector experts to receive input and feedback. CISA has also recently established certain sector-specific goals, which you may have heard about. Per the CISA website, the sector-specific goals are just additional voluntary practices with, again, that high-impact security action meant to address specific cybersecurity threats for those industries. The financial sector specific goals are due to be released in winter of 2025. So look out for those. I believe the energy industry and maybe chemical industry already have sector-specific goals. So if you're interested to see what those look like, those are available on the CISA website, which we have linked, I believe, somewhere in this presentation for you to reference. So now I'm going to share my screen and actually show you what the CPG profile looks like in practice, and we can kind of walk through that. So bear with me a moment as I get this pulled up.
And then we can see your screen, Sarah.
Right. Has the lag resolved? Can you see it now?
Yes, yes.
Okay, perfect.
Successful sharing.
Perfect. So first, just a brief overview of the document. The file includes an explanation of the content on the first, README tab. And then the function-aligned CPG components is really the meat, which we will walk through in just a second. As you can see, the CPG recommended actions. Let me switch tabs and zoom in. Hopefully you can see that. Excuse me. The CPG
Sarah,
recommended.
If you could zoom one more time, it might be easier to read. If that's not too much.
Is that better?
One bigger. Yeah, that's a little better.
Okay, perfect.
Thanks.
So as you can see, the CPG recommended actions, which are in essence security practices, outcomes together, are organized by NIST function, which Abe discussed earlier. So in the identify NIST function, for instance, we have asset inventory as the security practice, and the expected outcome is that organizations would be able to better identify known, unknown, and unmanaged assets and more rapidly detect and respond to new vulnerabilities. So they have the risks addressed here for you. They define the scope. They list recommended actions here. So for this one, maintaining a regularly updated inventory of all organizational assets with an IP address, et cetera, et cetera. They then reference NIST CSF. And then they also provide additional external references. We see ISO. So anything that may be of relevance, they've tried to include here. From a technical standpoint, I will say, not regulatory. We'll get into that with the CRI profile. You can see they also include a cost identifier here. So cost, impact, complexity, all things that you're also going to want to consider as you're implementing these security practices, which is also kind of neat. So you can tell from the front end, what the expected lift might be. And then they provide some additional resources. So in closing on the CPG framework, I'll just leave you with the knowledge that CPGs were developed with a focus on critical infrastructure. And while they may be relevant to financial institutions, it's worth considering each of the methodologies here just to ensure that you're proceeding with a framework that most closely addresses your institution's risk profile and goals. And now I will stop sharing this one. And we'll move on to the CRI profile. So switching gears from the more macro-focused CPG framework, let's move to CRI. The Cyber Risk Institute, aka CRI, is a not-for-profit coalition of financial institutions and trade associations. And the CRI profile is a freely downloadable framework that was developed with both regulators and cyber standards in mind, including NIST and ISO. So again, this tool is free to download. Some support features may only be available with a membership. They don't exactly make that clear on the website, but there is a lot of free content there. So I would encourage you to check that out as well. Thinking back to our timeline, slide, version 2.0 of the cyber risk profile was recently released in 2024. And then just in April of this year, 2.1 was released. The profile incorporates over 2,500 cybersecurity-related regulatory requirements and harmonizes them into what they call diagnostic statements, and they have 318 diagnostic statements. Their profile is designed to be generally applicable and usable by all types and sizes of financial institutions, and it's adaptable based on inherent risk and institutional circumstances. It's also designed to be usable and beneficial for those that are supervised by multiple different agencies, including international agencies, and by those that have less internal infrastructure, so smaller financial institutions, but who still want a credible, standardized self-assessment framework. So the views here were taken from the CRI website, and I wanted to show you what's available again. And we'll also take a look at their tool like we did with CPG. But from the view here, you can see that CRI provides a lot of tools and reference materials to help guide organizations through the process. So I will jump now into their demo profile, which is a snapshot of what you're seeing here. Get it to share again. All right, I'll give that a minute.
You are successfully sharing.
Okay, so with that in mind, I'm going to zoom in again. So again, I'll just kind of walk you through the document. This user guide walks you through how to use the tool. There are quite a few tabs. It begins with a summary of changes from its prior version, in which they make clear that there really weren't any changes in the diagnostic statements, just kind of the layout of the tool here. They then provide additional resources, including a guidebook, acknowledgements, and an in-depth overview of the document and its structure. They also call out here their catalog of mapped documents, which may be of interest to you all in complying with regulatory requirements. It references the regulations, guidance, and framework documents that the version 2.1 has been mapped to. And then there's also a tab for their NIST CSF mapping. So that's no surprise, as we keep seeing as the common theme that I mentioned earlier. So the profile is driven by organizational responses to this impact tiering questionnaire. Apologies, I thought I was at the top of this one. So this is the questionnaire. It scales to a firm's impact on the global economy based on a series of 9 questions. And these tailored questions focus on systemic impact, not on asset size. So the organization would begin by taking this assessment. The first tier is what they define as international, or aka supranational impact. Essentially, the largest organizations, the most complex and globally intermingled. Answering these questions. If no, you move on to your TUB tier with tier 2, subnational impact questions, which these are more national level, I would say, slightly less complex, not global. Tier 3, sector impact, so on and so forth. Tier 4 is essentially if your organization answers no to all the questions in tier 1, 2, and 3, none of those apply, then you're deemed a tier 4, which is considered localized impact. So that is the questionnaire. And once you know your tier, you can evaluate the profile based on that, and you'll find their basis for assignment in the financial services mapping references tab or column on the structure tab. Get here. So this is just kind of their approach to analyzing the tiers and assigning references. And then this is the actual meat of the document, the assessment tool. So I'd like to show another example like we did for CPG, I'm going to use this GBOC 4.03, which is around stakeholder service expectations. You can see the different tiers assigned here. So in this case, let's say we were a tier any 2 through 4. The way this works is the diagnostic statement, which is the topic, then has the detailed diagnostic, well, this is the name. The diagnostic statement is the detail, basically control-esque type language that you would adhere to if it applies to your tier. And you would find that identified in your tiering model. You can use their tool to document your assessment rationale, supporting evidence. They do provide response guidance, which is helpful. And then what I think is really cool is this examples of effective evidence packages. So as you're kind of working through this and thinking, what would this look like in practice? Like, what could we reference? They actually provide examples of what you might provide to evidence that you're complying here. So I thought that was really useful. And that's basically the meat of the document. They do provide additional detail on like evidence packages and additional mappings and such, but I think for purposes of today's discussion, you get the idea. And with that, I'm going to pass it back to Abe for discussion of the CIS controls.
Thank you, Sarah. I appreciate that. From the graphic icon that they are now displaying for CIS, which I'm discussing here, you can see that 25 years ago, internet crime began to dramatically increase as intelligence agencies for certain countries were dissolved. Various groups from the government to think tanks and security institutions came together to start solving security problems, and CIS was formed. In order for various industries to achieve frameworks such as NIST or HIPAA, CIS developed tools and processes to allow for ease of implementation of those frameworks. Seen here is some of the security suite features, but there are also specifics for incorporating PCI DSS, GLBA that are relevant to your industry, and other tools as well. CIS is able to manage and automate many of the tasks associated with each control of the CIS controls. This could be constructed by taking the top 7 CAT controls and cross-mapping it to CIS to create a new adapted framework. As shown here, there are clear tool sets available through CIS that organizations can subscribe to for access rights. These tools include the aforementioned Security Suite, which provides benchmarks and integrates with enterprise assets and software. Included in the product are 2 vulnerability assessment tools that evaluate system status. There are also build kits that automate remediation to the dashboard requirements for your specific systems that applies to Linux, Apple, and Windows. This is innate in the Secure Suite and therefore part of the dashboard, reducing the manual complexity and increased efficiency and accuracy comes out of it. Interestingly, it should be noted that CIS is mapped to CSF. However, they are not the same frameworks and they do not have the same features. Here we can clearly see the general presentation of the CIS control ecosystem with the implementation of groups, or IGs, implementation groups, as control categories and controls that exist with those categories. There are 18 implementation groups in total to apply across the enterprise. Those groups include everything from audit log management controls to service provider management controls to malware defenses. And you can see the titles for each control and a further explanation of the controls under the description. Under the blue row, you can see an implementation group depicted along with the controls for that group beneath it. With the most recent version of CIS 8.1.2, it does include mapping to the newer govern function of NIST CSF 2.0 that was added to the original version of NIST CSF that we noted earlier. In addition to the framework layout contents that we just examined, the body of knowledge for CIS also provides further details to understand the logic behind the framework and the relevance of the importance of the controls. Here you can see an illustration across the top that depicts how the implementation groups, or control categories as it were, build off one another to create the CIS ecosystem. While inventory and control of enterprise assets is an implementation group, it is seen here supported by specific controls that were represented in the earlier slide with a description for each control. The process of moving away from CAT is an organizational change management exercise. When you examine the options, it is very important to consider the scope of the change as defined by the organization's needs, the cost of the process, and the availability of subject matter experts that you may utilize for change management. By aligning with organizational future expectations and current use of the CAT, banks and credit unions can find their best path forward. There are ways to quantify such considerations, but that may need outside assistance. When examining the same framework options, the cost of effort and monetary cost becomes an important consideration. In scaling the cost of effort, ease of implementation favors CPG, then CSF, followed by CIS, then CRI as requiring the most effort. A consideration of how examiners will see the processes in place after the CAT needs to be part of the replacement decision. Have you taken the steps needed to secure our environment? Are we in a situation where we can communicate our current state effectively? There are a few of the impactful and quantifiable variables that the decision process should incorporate. Anders has decades of experience working with financial institutions. We have worked with some of the largest financial organizations in the world, some of which you are likely going to be doing business with today. Our background is so extensive in this field that we are able to scale efforts based on specific needs and be adaptable to your specific project expectations. We also provide a specific software platform that is extremely user-friendly for our clients. This platform can streamline and clearly display the progress of adapting to the major frameworks, and we are here to help you if you are interested in. And with that, I believe Brad has the floor.
Lucky you. All right. So we had left about 15 minutes in this for Q&A. As I'm looking in the Q&A, I don't see that we have any questions, though. If anybody wants to throw something in there quickly, we're happy to address that. But while we're waiting just a second for any questions to be submitted, Abe or Sarah, is there anything else you'd like to talk about just for a couple minutes before we start to close this out?
Well, I touched on the change management process, and that's a pretty lengthy endeavor. And there are specific programs and features that are available to help you with that. But when you look at change management, you actually have to have an adopted body of knowledge that can manage that type of enterprise-wide event or enterprise-wide project. And those are the kinds of things that we have expertise in. That we have spent years and years and years cross-correlating bodies of knowledge, everything from PMI to other organizational management practices that also go into our work for change management pieces like this. And the change management piece can be pretty cumbersome if you don't have the right kind of staff with the right kind of project management background. And Sarah and I have worked on that quite a bit in the past. And I don't know if Sarah has anything to add regarding that, but there are a number of specialty services that we specialize in for the purposes of allowing our clients to continue to do their normal jobs, which are obviously a full-time position that is not specifically focused on doing this. And that's what we're here to possibly help you with.
Thanks, Abe. Sarah, did you have anything you'd like to add?
I do not have anything else. Thanks.
All right. It looks like we're going to wrap up a little bit early. Still, though, if you do have a question that pops up, go ahead and throw it in there. We'll try to jump on it real quick. But otherwise, we can move on to our final poll of the day. Last chance to win a Starbucks gift card. And as always, with this final poll, we're just asking what topics you'd like to see covered in future webinars. So this can be anything related to IT, traditional compliance, BSA, or should I say CFT, a loan review, a bank tax, bank audit issues, you name it. and we'll take this information into consideration for future sessions. So do keep in mind that it's a word cloud. So keep things as short as you can, and the more a term or a phrase show up, the larger it will be on the screen. So I see quite a few things throwing up: loan compliance, loan review, CFT, somebody's on top of the BSA world, vendor management, CRA, M365. So Abe or Sarah, do you know what M365 is? That one's beyond me. So the IT people know what that means. Excellent. All right. It looks like that M365 is even moving to the forefront, so they must want to hear more from you all, less from me, which does not surprise me at all. All right. Very good. Well, we'll give just one quick second before we close out that poll. Oh, SOC reviews. There you go, Sarah. Somebody wants to hear from you. All right. Wonderful. So thank you all very much for participating in that poll and all the other ones. So we'll wrap up then. We'll just go through slides that had all of our contact information on them. I think the first one up for that is Abe. Very good. So, you can scribble down his phone number and email real quick if you'd like, but these slides were included in the email that went out this morning, and we'll also send a follow-up email within the next few days that'll include the slides as well. So you'll have his information there. And then after that, we have Sarah's. Similar, you'll have those slides, but her name's a little longer, so I'll pause for just a moment if you want to write it down. Going once, twice, and 3 times. And then finally, we'll get to my information. There we go. And if you got real specific IT questions, you probably want Abe or Sarah. But feel free to be in touch with me about anything related to banks or credit unions, and I'm happy to steer you in the right direction if your question is above my head in that area. If you'd like to book a meeting with me, you can just snap this QR code real quick, and it takes you to our booking app. In that, you can put some notes. Be sure to include in those notes what you'd like to discuss so I can be sure to have the right people on hand from our end. If you're asking about IT, it's probably going to be Abe or Sarah. Loan compliance, I might bring in Sandy or Sadie. BSA, I might bring in Josh. Those of you who know us probably know all those names, but just use those notes. We're happy to set up a meeting and chat. So I think, yep, I can see the winners coming up on my other screen. So those will be here shortly. So for the first poll, where we ask how long have you been in IT, the winner is Darlene Buchanan from Fidelity Bank. Congratulations, Darlene. One thing, if you could do, if you're a winner, really you're all winners in my mind. Everybody gets a trophy here, but only 3 of you get Starbucks cards. So if you are a Starbucks card winner, shoot me an email, bstumpy@anderscpa.com, just to make sure we have good contact information to get that to you. So Darlene Buchanan is the first winner. Jeff Wallace from BTC Bank is the winner for the poll, what framework do you use? And then finally, for the suggestions for future topics, Peggy Lauber from DCP is the winner on that. So congratulations to Darlene, to Jeff, and to Peggy. We'll be shooting out information to you once we hear back from you on those. So congratulations on that. All right. And that pretty much concludes the webinar. So we got 10 minutes extra here. Use it wisely. Please be on the lookout for our follow-up email that will include the slides and a link to the recording of this session. One last time, thank you very much for joining us today. Hope everyone has a great summer, and we look forward to seeing you at our Q3 webinar that will be towards the end of September. So thanks a lot. Bye now.